what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
This podcast is sponsored by the 2019 Footcandle Film Festival. This year's festival will be held September 27th through the 29th in Hickory, North Carolina. Learn more by visiting footcandlefilmfestival.com.
Footcandle Films. Film news and reviews from two guys who really like movies.
This episode is brought to you by the Footcandle Film Society. For a schedule of upcoming screenings and membership information, visit the Society's website at www.footcandle.org.
Welcome to Footcandle Films here on themesh.tv. My name is Alan, and I am a co-director and co-founder of the Footcandle Film Society. With me is Chris, also co-founder, co-director of the Footcandle Film Society. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
We may be a little draggy because, both of us saw a certain film last night. Mm-hmm. It's a little long.
It is.
3 hours and 45 seconds to be exact, if I remember correctly. And we've also been trying to cram in another couple of films to make sure we review. So it's been a little busy week, but we've got a lot to talk about in our review show here. So this is Footcandle Films on the Mesh. This is where we talk about both films in the movie theaters. We give some quick reviews of those films. We try to tiptoe through some movie news and items that maybe we can share with you that we're finding of interest in the film community. Then we will wrap up the show with our recommendations, a film that each of us choose that we want to offer up to the audience as something that you may want to consider checking out if you're in the market for looking for a film to pass your time, or maybe something to catch back up with that we think is worth your time. So today's episode, Chris, we've got kind of a full one. And the first review we're going to be going into in just a moment is the latest from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is the 22nd film of that saga.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. It is Avengers Endgame. Perhaps you've heard of it. Doing some pretty good business right now. We will be discussing that film, and just to go ahead and forewarn you, we will start the review as a very general review, but we will go fairly quickly, I think, after not too much time has gone by, into some more spoiler territory. So we will give you fair warning when we're going into that, in case you have not seen the film yet and do not want to be spoiled by anything we have to share. Then after that review, we'll be talking about another film, and this one is called The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. For those of you who've been listening to the show for quite a while, this is one that has made it into our news section quite a bit the constant story of, will Terry Gilliam ever get to finish his Don Quixote film?
Oh, it pops up like twice a year, at least.
And the answer is yes, he did make it, and we watched it, and we're going to review it here for you. Then after that review, we've got a couple of movie news items to share and discuss, and then the recommendations that I mentioned earlier. So, Chris, as long as Endgame is lengthwise and as much as we have to process, we better go ahead and get a start on this. Are you ready to enter the Endgame?
Yeah, let's assemble and do it. I guarantee we won't talk 3 hours and 2 hours and 59 minutes or whatever you said.
I'm guessing 2:30 is maybe what will go on the discussion here.
Fair enough.
We'll trim it a little bit. That is correct. We're going to be talking about Avengers Endgame.
I saw all these people die. I keep telling everybody they should move on. Some do, but not us.
Even if there's a small chance, we owe this to everyone who's not in this room to try.
We will. Whatever it takes.
Chris, there have been very few film franchises that I can think of that can tout 22 films. James Bond, who we will talk about in our news section a little bit later.
He's getting up to 25.
Getting ready to go to their 25th.
Okay.
However, that's also been over a, probably 50-year period of time?
Right.
25 films. Out of those 25 films that the James Bond franchise has had, I got to imagine that, not all of them fared as well on Rotten Tomatoes or any kind of critic aggregate site. I know those didn't exist until just in the last 10 years, but
Sure.
Imagine if they had. some of those James Bond movies were kind of clunker. Some of them just were not good films.
Right.
You've had a few that were really stand out, but it's been a mixed bag, I'd say, on the James Bond front. Then you take other franchises we've had that have had 3, 6 films. I think Star Trek's maybe pushed up with the 2 different versions of Star Trek. Might be up to like maybe 10 films, 11 films. I'm not sure.
I guess that may be the closest, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. When you
factor
in the original series, you factor in the Next Generation films, which there are a couple of those. Then you had this new parallel universe version, the J.J. Abrams version.
Right.
There might be 11, 12 Star Trek films.
But nowhere near 22.
Still talking 22 over a 12, 13 year time span too.
Sure.
So here we are. Avengers Endgame is the culmination of this. And Marvel has come right out and said this is kind of the ending of this whole 22 movie saga. This chapter of our universe is now coming to an end. Okay. Now, you and I reviewed Avengers Infinity War, which...
Yes.
For a little background, when they first promoted these 2 films, they were promoted as Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2.
Right.
Then they made a change and say, no, we're just going to have Infinity War be one movie and we're not going to tell you the name of the next movie yet. Then Infinity War came out, and then a little while later they teased us and they said, okay, fine, the name's Endgame.
Right.
It's still Infinity War Parts 1 and 2, if you really want to look at it that way. You were not so high on the Infinity War movie. I think you and I actually got a little disagreements on kind of how we take that style of storytelling. You were frustrated by just the multiple strands and stories and the kind of the teasing of new things and not really completing and telling a whole story on its own and all that. And just, you were not as enamored with it. Me, I may try to make a stand for the idea of serialized storytelling that I think it was trying to convey. And I loved this cliffhanger notion and where it was going to lead to, and got actually excited for Endgame. Actually, I don't get terribly excited about films coming up because I think in the years we've been reviewing films, I've tended to be a little more pessimistic about whether or not a film's going to be good before I go into it.
Sure.
This one, I'm pretty amped for it. You can ask my family that went with me last night. We were pretty excited for it. So, Chris, all this I'm saying is built up because this is a big film to talk about. And my question to you really comes down to, given the fact that this is branded as this big finale, and it is truly a finale to the previous film. I mean, it is a follow-up to that.
It's part 2 to the part 1.
Does this film elevate your stature of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole? Or at the least, did it elevate your stature of this 2-part story that they're telling now that you've seen the conclusion to its rightful end?
Well, does it elevate the Marvel Universe as a whole? Easy answer is no. Okay. Because, I guess when you're trying to juggle as many ideas and stories and plot threads and everything that they are, which, I give it to them. I thought Infinity War, to skip back to that because that addresses the same thing here with Endgame, they were juggling a lot. And for it to not be a horrible mess was pretty impressive, considering, they were building off 20 other films, and that was the 21st, and they've just got a lot of stuff going on. It still was unsatisfying for me in that it was kind of messy, but it could have been a whole lot worse. It could have been just ridiculously bad. Upon a revisit that I did of that film to get ready, because I'd forgotten who died and who lived, who turned to ashes and who didn't. So I revisited it, and I actually thought, okay, it's not as bad as I remembered. Yeah, it's still kind of slow and, the pacing's a little off. But overall, okay, I liked it a little better. With this one, I feel like it was a good part 2 to the part 1 that had been before it. It's nowhere near the top of my favorite Marvel films. Okay. Because I did, I had said at one point in one of a previous show that I was going to go on Letterboxd and actually rank the 21 films to kind of get a standing of where certain ones. And it's definitely not at the top. It's definitely not number 1. I'd have to go back and put it back in there now. But it was a good ending, and a good, I guess, close out to however you could close out this story. And not being familiar like you are with kind of the story arc of Infinity War, of the whole idea of who Thanos was, it probably limits me in somewhat of an appreciation, which, I feel like this film, even more so than maybe Infinity War, Endgame, to its detriment, in my opinion, but I'm sure if you're a fanboy, it would be the absolute opposite. I feel like it does it's very focused on fan service, so much so that sometimes if you're not a fan or you're just an average moviegoer, you're like, okay, let's move on. I get it. Let's progress, So that was kind of to its detriment. But there were things about Endgame that I like. I think it's a nice end to the 21 films that came before it. But honestly, the things that I will say, and I think that was one of my big disappointments, was the fact that I knew it was going to be kind of a 2-part thing, even though they tried to hide the titles and unhide the titles about part 1, part 2. Oh no, it's just Infinity War, and then they can't know that. Okay. That aside, I have to admit, going into this, which is everybody's question, we'll get into spoiler talk later. Who lives, who dies, who tells the story, to quote Hamilton. But that's kind of like what you want to know is like, okay, what are they going to do? They confront Thanos within the first, let's say, 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that was surprising to me. And I really, not knowing a lot of the comic book history background, I don't know if that was the same as how they played out in the comic books or not. But that was very, very satisfying to me because I was like, oh, cool. Because you think that's something that's going to happen 2/3 or maybe and nope, that happens in the first 15 minutes. So I was actually kind of really surprised by that. But then after that happens, they kind of, it was kind of like full throttle, and then they kind of put back into second gear for a little bit of some of the movie, which I understand, they're, pacing and 5 years pass at one point. So I get it, but just, it still seemed a little bloated to me, but I get they're trying to cover a lot. So I guess if they pared things down, they'd tick off the fanboys. They feel like it's just really crammed full of a lot of stuff. But there were things that I liked. So before I get into specifics, Alan, what was your initial take on Endgame?
Well, of course, I come to this from a whole different perspective. I am said fanboy. Right. I am the one claiming for fan service along the way. But however, I did go with my wife to see this, and my wife is the farthest thing from a fan. She does not know these characters. She does not know anything other than things I have told her.
So my wife doesn't listen to this podcast, so I'm going to go ahead and throw under the bus. As we were watching the credits, she actually turned to me and was like, I thought Wonder Woman was going to be in this.
Wow.
Sorry, Brenna, but you don't listen to the show, so you don't know. So, and I was like, no, she's DC. So that was
my wife at least.
You talk about having somebody with you.
My wife at least knew that and was making jokes on the way out of the lobby, loudly saying, "I thought Wonder Woman was great in it," and knowing good and well that Wonder Woman's not in it, and trying to upset all the fanboys in the lobby.
Nice.
So I got my perspective, and then I got the perspective of someone who's not a fan but just goes for enjoyable movies.
Right.
My wife had a wonderful time with the film, loved it. Thought it was extremely entertaining, even though she didn't know all the nuances and all the fan service stuff. I really liked the film a lot. Now, I actually probably don't like it as much as Infinity War. Mm-hmm. And I can go into the reasons why.
Okay.
But there's a lot more things I admire about this film than Infinity War. Infinity War pulled off something I'll explain later that I still think was pretty miraculous. It's the covering all those characters and juggling all those balls without feeling like it was overwhelming to me. That was Infinity War for me. I mean, I was the one who said when Infinity War was announced and it was going to be all these people in it, I'm like, oh my God, that's going to be a mess. How in the world are you going to do it? Somehow they did it. This movie juggles everything fine too. I feel like there's some tonal things with it that don't work for me as well, which we can talk about in spoilers because it really does hinge on a lot of the big plot points. Tonally, the film was a little more mixed for me all over the place. Okay. I still admire the script writers. I will say till my dying day, the guys who wrote the scripts for these two films, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, they know how to write these movies to where if you had told me that there were 20 plus big name actors and characters that we were going to be following in a 3-hour film and that I would not feel like lost or overwhelmed, right? I would have said you're crazy. But yet in 2 films in a row, I think it's been pulled off where I still can at the end of the movie be like, wow, they actually hit, everybody got a moment. There was like simultaneous storylines that I could follow. The, stakes I understood all the way through. I understood what everybody was trying to do for the most part throughout the entire film. There are so many other superhero films that I can't say that about, or science fiction films or action films that I find myself halfway through not sure what's going on or not sure what every character's motivation is. I've never felt that with these two movies. So I'm going to give them huge props for that. I will just say that I think it was a really fun movie. I had probably had a much more enjoyable time watching this movie because I watched it in a really packed theater with a lot of rabid fans.
Right.
So I had a great experience watching it. It had more fun moments for me, but I think as an overall film, it didn't work as well for me as Infinity War did. But I think the two of them together do work as a singular piece. Now,
well, thank goodness they released it separately.
well, and there's also an argument to make. They could have probably made it 3 movies instead of 2 and not had them be 3 hours long each. So, but I will just say some generalities, and then I'd like to hear some generalities before we go into spoiler stuff.
Sure.
I've been fine with Tony Stark, with Robert Downey Jr.
Sure.
I thought his shtick got a little old after a few movies, and it's like he plays the smart guy, and he's playing a very kind of accentuated version of himself as a persona. I will say I thought he was really good in this movie. Robert Downey Jr., probably the best I've seen him play this character since the very beginning.
Okay.
I think he had some really interesting scenes that I'll talk about in spoilers, where he had some really interesting things to say and got to play a little against type, and I thought it was great. I thought Chris Evans was very good in this movie as well. He's always been my favorite out of this whole deal, and I thought he really did a great job as Captain America, Steve Rogers. Had some great moments too. Again, we can talk about in spoilers. And I think on the acting side, that's probably where my accolades stop. No, it's not that anybody did a bad job. It's just everybody was just kind of serviceable,
Wow.
I felt like everybody was playing their part.
Okay.
And did fine reciting the lines they're supposed to recite. But I don't feel like anybody else really came to the acting game and stepped it up. But I do feel like our 2 main protagonists did. I even thought Thanos, who I really thought was an incredibly effective villain in Infinity War, probably one of the better realized villains I've seen in a while, wasn't as impressive in this film either. So, my feelings are mixed. I like this film a lot. I had a really good time with it, but
sure.
And it was a great culmination. It did a great job of wrapping everything together. I'm impressed with how everything did kind of come to an end in a storyline ending, which is the first time we've seen that in any of these Marvel films, because every Marvel films kind of leaves you with a lot more strands. It's just that continuation story. This one, I felt like, with a couple of exceptions, wrapped up pretty good. But everything else I'm going to talk about has to be spoiler based. So,
okay.
What about you? Anything generality you just want to say?
Yeah, I can run down. I think all my comments are basically pretty non-spoilery, so
okay.
I can run into those. I'll say that overall, I've said one of my misgivings was I felt like they had a lot of things that they just crammed in this movie. So if they would have paced it out into 3, maybe it would have been better. But I feel like there was just too much going on, even though they did have a 3-hour running time. So if they tried to explain everything, it probably would have been 6.5 hours. So thank goodness they didn't do that. But the other thing too, that you kind of mentioned, and it's a negative for me, but I'll get in how it's like a negative positive or a positive negative, because it's both. Tone in this film. I mean, spoiler, if you haven't watched Infinity War, half the world's population gets wiped out. So, considering that, any kind of jokes often kind of land with a thud, because it's like, yeah, you're joking about this, but yet you're in the same, like a sentence before you were talking about how everybody's dead, or lots of people are dead. But I get it. You want to have a little bit of laughs in there because this is ostensibly a, air quotes, kids movie, because it's a comic book movie. It's not rated R. It is PG. So I get that you're trying to provide a little bit of levity. Otherwise, it could just be really dark. And they did have a little bit of the way I liked how they did in Infinity War. Basically, once they got going, the humor kind of stopped, which made it kind of boring because then you didn't have anything to break the tension. But early on, when you had the explanation scene with Doctor Strange kind of filling Tony Stark in on like, here's who Thanos is, like in Infinity Stones, kind of explaining everything, there was some back and forth there that was kind of funny. This film has some what I thought were funny things that I liked, but within the context of this film, I think maybe shifting a little bit too much of a tone. Now, but I liked it. I'm just not sure it worked in the film. And my example is Thor is the Big Lebowski. Basically, after the events of the first film, Thor kind of becomes a bum on Earth. He kind of becomes a bum, and they set up this like new Asgard type place. And I won't go into much more of that, but kind of that idea and kind of spinning off a little bit of those shorts that he's made with Taika Waititi about living in an apartment and being a bum. And actually the body image that he does, I think is really funny. And the reaction in the theater of lots of females who obviously love the heck out of some Hemsworth were aghast. Like, like I actually heard audible gasp in the theater and like, oh no, this kind of thing. That was really entertaining for me. But in the context of the film, kind of jarring because it was too much like Thor Ragnarok, which is a completely different type of Marvel movie, and that's what made it so refreshing. But I feel like that one did a better job balancing tone. So although I like those moments within the context of this film, kind of jarring.
Well, and again, I've got some more things to say when we get spoiler wise, but yes, I agree with you. Again, tone was the issue for me too. I'm all for humor, but I do feel like that there's a whole middle section of the film that we can talk about in a little bit more detail. That's something that I think was a nice surprise, kind of the direction the story took.
Okay.
I did not expect it.
Okay.
And I thought it was a great, I love the fact that I didn't know any more about this film. Even the previews only showed you stuff that was really in the first 20 minutes.
Sure.
That was awesome. I will go and give props to the marketing department for not spoiling anything for really the last 2 hours
about
of the
kind
film.
of the solution about how they were going to attack the problem. That was refreshing to me. I mentioned one of the things that was refreshing was confronting Thanos. The second thing that was refreshing was how they were going to try to win the battle.
Well, how are they going to win?
Yeah, and that was
they had an idea. I had a theory in my own mind trying to think how they're going to do this, and it turned out my theory was right. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't because they gave me any hints on it. Right. It's just truly me trying to figure out how are you going to do this.
Yeah, that was a nice surprise.
It was incredibly inventive. Unfortunately, I think the tonal shift during that whole section lost sight of the whole seriousness of the storyline.
Right.
Where I actually enjoyed the first portion of this film immensely. Mm-hmm. Even as serious and dour as it was, I thought some of the dialogue that was happening, some of the character moments were really, really good.
Agreed.
And I thought the ending was pretty well done.
It's like, if you're dividing it up into thirds, I would agree. First third, really good. Second third, I actually liked, even though the tone was way off, but I liked kind of what they were doing. And then actually the weakest part, which is probably why I end up where I end up, the last part, unfortunately, it was another big climax, which it's going to be. Climactic battle scene, really hard to see. It was, dark, I'm
with you on that. And I'm the one that's always against the big overdone CGI spectacle, big 20-minute battles of the movies.
21 films, you're building up to something that's
I give them a pass on it because I thought it was still, given all the chaos out there, it was relatively well done. But I will say,
probably as well done as it could be.
I still don't feel like it was as good as some of the big battle scenes at the end of Infinity War, which I did think were a lot easier to follow, were a lot better, well directed.
Well, at least they were in the daylight.
Yeah, this one just was a lot more of just throw everything in the screen.
Yeah,
and a lot more commotion. It was kind of hard to follow the action.
I'll say something to keeping it vague because it's another positive because I do want to say some positives. I am not that familiar with the Guardians of the Galaxy characters. I remember when the movies came out, I told you, I have no clue who these people are. I don't know any of their background. Having seen Infinity War and the first 2 Guardians movies, I knew who Nebula was. And I kind of thought that I got the, her relationship to Thanos and everything. Re-engaging with that idea in this movie and kind of what that brings about and the way it was done through the writing and everything, I thought was really cool. That was and I didn't expect that because she's kind of a minor, she's not Captain America. She's not, Iron Man, so kind of having her end up being kind of more of a bigger player. And then I was like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. Wasn't expecting that. So sure. I liked that. So,
well, I will just say before we get into spoiler stuff, I had a really good time with the film. I thought considering everything it's trying to accomplish, I think it did a really good job. I love the fact that it surprised me a lot. However, I will just say I just did feel like the tone was just a little tough to kind of keep balanced. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like, although I love some of the fan service moments, I do feel like some things were just purely in there for fan service, and I don't appreciate that when that's been done. Mm-hmm. When fan service happens naturally in service of the story and it creates a really cool moment or scene, I'm all for it. I love it.
Right.
It's just when you feel like it's almost being forced in. I'm going to give it a pass on a lot of that with this being this last big culmination film, but it still made it a little less enjoyable experience than the film that preceded it.
Are you giving a pass to Hawkeye's haircut in the second half of the film?
Yeah, that's fine.
Man, so distracting.
It's just a haircut.
But it's a really bad one.
All right, so let's talk a little spoilery stuff if we can. I want to go into some specifics here and before we go too deep into things. So, guys, we are going to spoil some details. If you have not seen the film or don't want to be spoiled or anything else, skip forward, and once you hear us playing the Don Quixote, the Man Who Killed Don Quixote trailer,
then
or we mention anything about Terry Gilliam or whatever, that's a good sign that you've gone far enough. But I will try to have that trailer break in there. So spoilers start in 3, 2, 1. So, Chris, I will say, I mentioned before, the first portion of this film I really liked.
Sure.
Because I really felt like it was taken with some seriousness. I mean, half the population's gone.
Right.
And just, I love the format of that first 30, 40 minutes of the film where it's like, okay, this just happened like within a couple of days ago. Our remaining heroes are, man, okay, this sucks. It's like, this is bad. This is really bad. We're all upset. But you know what? Let's go take down the SOB. Let's go get the guy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, they all just kind of stood around
and said, figure out where he is. Oh, no, we can. Okay, no, we can. Then let's go get him.
Let's go to get him.
Yep.
And it's like, it wasn't anything built up. It wasn't this whole, we got to train for an hour or whatever the film. It's like, no, let's just go do it.
Right.
And they go and they do it.
Right.
And they kill the guy.
Yeah.
Thanos gets his head cut off.
Thor specifically kills the guy.
Well, and that him walking off, once he's realized out of anger and just frustration, he killed Thanos. Mm-hmm. But now they have no way of solving this problem of half the world's population's gone.
Right.
That sense of defeat, that moment of, man, okay, yeah, we did what we said we're going to do, but now we're screwed. I mean, we have no turning back now.
Sure.
That was fascinating to me. To me, this is like a role that I don't normally see superhero characters playing in a movie. The scene I was talking about with Robert Downey Jr., I thought was just really impressive, was they rescued him from space. Captain Marvel was the one who found him floating out in space with Nebula.
Right.
She brought him back, rescued him. And he's on an IV. Mm-hmm. He's emaciated. I don't know if that was Robert Downey Jr. really lost that weight, but man, he looked rough.
Or if it was just CGI. But
Could be CGI. But, he kind of drops the smarmy bit just enough to say, I'm upset. We screwed up. And even most notably, Cap, you screwed up, and he's like honestly taking it out on the rest of the guys. He said, I wanted to fix this whole thing years ago. I had ideas of how we were going to do it.
Days,
yeah.
Right?
I wanted to take care of this and you guys fought me on this. And now look where we are. And you buy it. I'm like, yeah, I totally get where he is. He's ticked. This is upsetting to him. So seeing those character moments with him, I thought were extremely well done. It's probably the best acting I've seen him do in that character because he was really playing a more real person as opposed to this facade he puts on around everybody else.
Right.
So this whole first 30 minutes or so, and then them realizing that they're we go the 5 years later, there's a 5-year jump, and we see that things are still pretty crummy, and they're doing their best to keep it together, but it's really just like a Band-Aid situation now on stuff. All that I thought was so great and loved it. So you like the first part too?
Yeah, I do. And I think what we're going to slide into is the talk of time travel. And yeah, I mean, given that that's the route they went down, which if they had to go time travel so that they could have the Thanos moment in the beginning where they kill him, it was worth it to me.
Yeah.
And I liked it. How they got there using the quantum universe
realm,
and so yeah, I mean, maybe a little clunky, but I mean, it's time travel and there again, some of the jokiness that they threw it about, wait, this isn't like Back to the Future. And they were so aware of what they were doing. It's like, yeah, I get it, guys. You're using this and we're just going to have to accept it. And I feel like, yeah, as an audience, you can either accept it like you do Back to the Future, or you can be like, wait, that doesn't make sense because they're doing everything. Like you just can't, you kind of have to let that go. And I guess,
time travel's a tricky. Time travel's tricky for me in general. It makes my head hurt. I spend too much time trying to think about the logistics of it all. Sure. I'll tell you, one scene almost saved the whole thing. And again, this is probably my least favorite part of the film, even though it had the most entertaining moments and like interactions and quips and lines. As a whole, the whole section, though, I thought was
talking about when Stark meets his father?
Yeah. I mean, there were too many convenient moments, too many coincidences, too many jokes, too many playing against types for that whole middle section that I just felt like we kind of lost the stakes of what we're trying to do. It's like, okay, if we screw this up,
right?
We're done. I mean, that's it, and yet I just don't feel like that was really comedic. I mean, Thor especially. Thor's like kind of freaking out, doesn't want to see his mom, doesn't really want to do this. He's kind of like, kind of backing out of it. I'm like, dude, I get that you're playing, they got him playing like this beach bum guy now, out of shape, but come on, this is like for all the marbles and this is like your one chance and you're kind of chickening out on it.
Right.
I don't get it, but it was for jokes. It was like, oh, let's play him as this goofy guy now. That's when it started to go too much in the humor on these flashbacks and time travel. It kind of lost me for a little bit. The audience was loving it. All the throwback moments were great. But I'm just like, but man, this is
the one
throwback, a big story.
I can see how it bothered you, and yet I love Chris Hemsworth. I love the Thor character. I've always liked him being humorous. But in that moment when it's like, you've got a mission, you should have been in and out of there pretty quickly. And it gets kind of...
He's just like, well, I want to go find the wine. I think my dad used to have a wine cellar. I'm like, okay.
It gets
I think the whole
down.
Beach bum thing got played way too long. It's
Probably.
like, I'm all for it when you first meet him and you see how out of shape he is and he's playing Fortnite with his friends. I'm like, got it. Awesome.
Right.
But the minute Thanos' name is mentioned in front of him and he gets so stone sober and cold, that should have been the way he is from that way on. It's like, okay, now you've presented me with a way that we can get revenge on this and we can get this fixed.
Right.
I'm in. And I'm out of shape and I'm not in my game, but I'm still going to push forward and go.
I agree. I wish they would have kind of shifted gears at that point, but they didn't. Even though the setup, they were going to do time travel once they started getting into it, the fact that they go where they chose to time travel, the other instances, honestly, weren't that interesting to me. The Thor visiting here, it was kind of like, okay, them going to the planet for the Soul Stone. That to me was like, I liked where it had to end up, which I was like, how's this going to work? And I liked how that particular scene ended up. But they were all kind of, I don't know, for some reason they weren't. The one that actually interested me, which I guess maybe you could predict, but I couldn't, was when they go back to literally the same time frame as the first Avengers movie with the attack. And I was like, oh, well. So it was kind of like they were watching themselves and all that kind of thing. You see the things attacking the city and you're like...
Well, because that actually kind of gave you some great insight as to what happened during that first Avengers movie after they apprehended Loki. And they're like... I mean, it was cool. I'm like, okay, yeah, so they're actually supposed to turn him into this group. But now they're saying no. And there's actually a disagreement. And there's... All that was cool because I really felt like we were seeing an angle of a scene that's like a classic scene that now we're seeing in a different way. The other ones were just like, okay, yeah, there's Star-Lord singing to himself.
They were servicing the story.
It's like, yeah, that's fine.
And that's for humor, of course.
We're just going to go do the same thing he did. And it just didn't. That middle section didn't work for me as much as it probably did for a lot of people. But I
understand.
I think it was the combination of being time travel and the combination that I think that the tone just got a little silly. It just got a little silly at times. More so than I think it needed to be for the kind of film that this was. I appreciated the first and second, but then the third part of the film was what really kind of wore me down. It was the long extended battle scene in the dark for better. Yeah.
But I think they did it as good as they could. It just kind of really wore me down.
Well,
but then the two of the final like end scenes, there's a pan or a dolly. It's not a pan. It's really kind of a dolly shot among groups of characters at a funeral. And they had to show us each set. And I'm just kind of like, okay, I get it. Here's the big, it's like just really random. And then somebody comes walking out a door and stands on the porch just so you were sure that. And I was just like, okay, got you.
It was,
and what was even worse to me is there were some people, and probably because I'm not a fanboy, that were there, and I'm like, who are you? Why are
probably
you?
one person, nobody knew who he was.
Oh,
And
okay.
we had to look it up online and find out who it was.
But that was irritating because I was just like, okay, you're doing this, but it's such fan service. And on top of that, like some of these people, who are they?
My thing is, if you hadn't had all the time travel bits and all the recalling the classic moments from the franchise and all that, if you didn't have that type of device going on in the middle of the movie, I'm all fine. Give me a big, long fan service scene. That's fine. Because I feel like, again, culmination movie, you're kind of capping this all off. But we had already gone through so much fan service with the time travel, and now we're also going to give you some more fan service at the end. It was a little much. I felt a little forced.
And to pile on, two additional clunky moments that happened after that was there is a transitioning of somebody who portrays a character to somebody else. That could not have been handled more clunkily and terribly in my book. And then
We're spoilers, so you can say who it is.
okay, so Captain America passes his shield. That was so terribly done because these two characters are, just kind of standing around. They're like, where's Captain America? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there he is. These two characters go over, and then one character turns to the other for no apparent reason and says, oh, you go up and talk to him. And it's like, why are you doing that? It's like as if you know that he's going to pass the shield to this other character and let him be. It's like, it was dumb. It's like, no, why don't you both go up there and talk to him? Why can't you both talk to him? Dumb. And this character is sunsetting now. He is leaving the franchise. You think he has a wedding ring on. Somebody asks them, oh, how was, you got married. How was your wife? He's like, I'm not going to say, or, make some kind of sense. And just kind of smiles. Nice moment, fade to black. Can we do that? Oh, no. We've got to go back in time and see him having a slow dance with his wife. I'm like, come on.
So that moment absolutely worked for me.
Oh, gosh. Jeez.
Captain America comes back as an old man because he's basically gone back in time and he's lived his life. I thought it was a great moment. And it's a great callback because the first Captain America movie, you got the whole save a dance for me, and now they get their dance.
Terrible.
I thought that was great. I thought that was really good. The clunkiness with the passing the shield on, yes.
Yeah, like, okay, since you're going to throw out names, Bucky, who's his, bestie, he sees him and he's like, oh, what's this over here? He and, what's his name? Falcon. Whatever.
Sam Wilson.
They go walking over there, and then they realize it's him, and then Bucky turns to him and is like, Sam, go talk to him. I'm like, why don't you both go talk to him? What's happening? Oh, I get it. Only Sam could talk to him because he's going to pass the shield to Sam so he can be the new Captain America. Man, bad. Poorly handled. And I guess it's letting people know, hey guys, don't worry. We're still going to have Avengers movies, and won't we be cool because an African American will be Captain America now.
Wow.
Groan-inducing.
Man, Chris.
Also
Chris
while I'm at it, also groan-inducing. Captain Marvel, loved the movie. They got a lot of flack from a lot of fanboys because I guess they hate the fact that women were becoming a central theme in comic book universe. And they're like, no, this is our territory. Okay. I think they overdid it a little bit in the final CGI climactic battle mess.
Completely agree.
They had, I think it was Captain Marvel initially maybe helping out. No, or maybe it was, it was one lady character that was helping out Spider-Man, and he's like, oh, how you go? And then basically, from out of nowhere, all the women Avengers assembled behind him. It was like, it was like a poster or a T-shirt. And I was like, okay, guys, we get it. It was
that was the example I was giving of fan service just for the point of fan service, and it didn't really add to the story or really make sense in the story at all. No, I agree. That part was groan-inducing. Yeah, again, I think the last third just was not as strong as I'd hoped it would be. I don't think the emotional payoff was quite as strong with people returning that had been kind of killed in the first movie, and now they're back. It was all very convenient. It was all very contrived. It was all very kind of to make cool poster frames from different shots. I get it, and that's why I say the last battle thing didn't work for me as well as what the ending of Infinity War did, which I thought was a lot more there were reasons why everything was happening. And I felt like we kind of broke the teams up and we were seeing them in smaller battles and it made sense. I knew what was going on. Here was just, let's just throw everybody onto a big battlefield and just go nuts for 15, 20 minutes. And that's never my favorite type of storytelling. So yeah, there were some interesting, fun moments within that big battle, but not enough to make it worth the whole battle scene on its own.
Gotcha.
But, me being a fan, some of the fan servicing moments, especially the ending bits, Tony Stark's funeral, the whole Captain America aging
totally
thing.
spoilers. Telling who died.
Oh, no, we're already there. I mean,
sure.
We had two major Avengers die, Black Widow and Tony Stark. And,
you assume Captain America's done.
Well, he's done. He's not dead, but
Right.
he's not going to be Captain America anymore. So
Unless he can do so with a cane.
Right.
Something. Yeah.
So Hawkeye, I think, is kind of retiring. Or at least he had planned to retire. He only got pulled out whenever his family got wiped away. Now they're back. So
amusing. You mentioned earlier in the review watching it in a full theater.
yeah.
Kind of the suspension of my disbelief too is, we sit down, it opens up on Hawkeye and you see him with his family. You're like, oh, and I immediately was
you know what's
okay,
gonna
we
happen.
know what's happening here because they're obviously going to show us the snap happen and then the fallout on his family. And I guess maybe not everyone was anticipating that because some people are like, oh, when they see Hawkeye. And I'm like, yeah, but guys, you realize what it's about to. And sure enough, the snap happened and you saw him like turn around looking for his daughter. And then there were like gas in the theater. I'm like, seriously?
Well, I mean, if you expect it, it's still an emotional, nice beat. But I mean,
Sure.
I can see some people thinking all that happened in the past in the last movie. Now this is like
Right.
a lot time longer, not realizing that it's going to coincide.
It's
going to
dovetail.
So,
Yeah.
There was some nice audience moments, I think, throughout the film for me, which was great. It did add to the enjoyment of it. Again, I had a good time with the film.
Sure.
I do feel like it was messier at the end than it needed to be. I feel like we lost a lot of that emotional connection we had to the characters that I think they did such a great job of building up in the first, third of the film. The time travel bit, I get it. And I think it was fun. And it was kind of cool to see some of those scenes kind of reenacted.
And it was their way of breaking out into teams.
Yeah, and I get that as well. I just wish the tone had been a little more consistent. And it's not that I wanted a dour, serious movie, but just, okay, guys, I get some little quips and jokes here and there, but man, sometimes the humor was just downright silly, and it just didn't work for the whole film as a whole for to go quite that extreme with the tone.
And not always clear what you could bring back by snapping your finger, what you could do by snapping your fingers. Because at one point,
I think it's just it's a total wish fulfillment.
Well, but at one point, the Hulk does it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I tried to do this, but it didn't quite work."
No. What he said is he was able to bring back everybody that died from the snap, but he couldn't bring back Black Widow. He wanted to. He was trying, and my son and I got into a whole
But I don't
discussion.
understand. I don't
Well,
understand.
the logic.
And then, at the end, Iron Man snaps, and just all the bad guys disappear. It was like, well, if you can command what happens, then
I think, and again, I'm probably going to get way too nerdy on this, but I think the fact that one of the stones is that soul stone and they had to sacrifice somebody in order to get that.
Right.
It's a situation where you can't snap that person back into existence because
But
to do so,
somebody
you have to use it.
somebody was snapped back. Somebody is currently in existence.
No, that's the old version of that character. The current version's still dead. Gamora is still dead. We are now seeing a version from the past that got brought to the future. This is where time travel starts to hurt my head. But again, it's
because what? Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
I understand their logic,
Kinda
the way
falls
they're trying to
apart.
do it. It does. Time travel in general just makes it fall apart. I mean, it does.
Can't really happen.
Because then my question would be, well, why not go back in time now with
Get
the
Vision
and get Vision and get Black
sure.
Widow and bring them back, and now you've got them like here. But I get it. The argument is that the Soul Stone, you had to sacrifice somebody to get that. So now to be able to use that to bring them back, you would technically lose that stone again, and it just
But
it
you
doesn't
lose
work
all
that
the
way.
stones anyway because you're going back to try to smooth out the timeline because
Right.
bald-headed, whatever her name was, that was the pre-Doctor Strange to Doctor Strange said you had to do that. It's like, yeah, but if you do that and you replace all the soul
this
stones,
is why-
then Thanos will just always get them again and you'll be stuck in an endless loop.
But they killed the Thanos from the past when he came to the current future, and they wiped him out. So there's no Thanos in the past anymore. Yeah, I know. This is why I don't like time travel. Okay, this is exactly why I don't like time travel.
Right.
This is why it hurts my head. This is why the minute I realize that they're going to do the time
like,
travel thing, I'm
uh-oh.
like, oh, here we go. This is going to be interesting. And
Sure.
at least they kept it entertaining.
Yeah.
But if I put my head too much into it and thought too much about it, it does start to really slowly unravel and fall apart pretty bad. So
Fair enough.
okay, Avengers Endgame. I will say I thought it was fun. I had a good time with it. I just wish it was more consistent, and I wish the tone was not all over the place. And I wish the ending fight scene was not just a whole bunch of CGI all over the place. And they've done it better in other films, so I know it's possible to do. Captain America: Civil War had a great hero fight
At the airport?
Yeah, at the airport.
Yeah.
That sure it used a lot of CGI. It was a lot of animation, but it
worked.
was effective, and it just you could follow it, and you knew what was going on, and you had an emotional investment in the fight. Here, I couldn't get really that invested in the big battle scene. So,
And for what it's worth, Civil War is my favorite MCU movie. I can say that without a doubt. That is number one on my list.
yes, I've seen said list.
I
Yes, I
see.
know your list.
Fair enough.
I have not done my list yet, but I will. All right. Well, I think we've talked enough about that. Avengers Endgame. It is out everywhere. Will be for a while. I do think if you are a fan of any of the Marvel films at this point, you should go see it. It's a fun experience in the theater. It is 3 hours long. It is a long film. But I think it flows pretty well. It didn't feel like 3 hours quite to me. It felt long, but it didn't feel that long. And I think just an interesting achievement to pull together what they did with as many characters, as many people as they did, and to still make a good, entertaining film. I give them props for that. I just think it could have been a little better, but I mean, that sounds nitpicky at this point. It's still a good, entertaining film.
Sure.
So that's Avengers Endgame. Let's move on to something on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, Chris. Not only in scope and size and per box office performance, but we are going to talk about a film that, squeaked by and just made it up online for people to start seeing. It is the latest from Terry Gilliam, the long in development, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote.
Don Quixote de la Mancha, come to restore the lost age of chivalry. Well, I wrote that. Blasphemer! A hand of our God in heaven wrote me. Can I read? A peasant like you cannot read. I will sound the words, and you can look at the pictures. He actually believes he's Don Quixote.
This is going to be fun.
He's a saint. He's insane. I am Don Quixote.
With recent additions to his catalog being movies like The Zero Theorem, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, and Tideland, I'd begin to wonder if my days of anticipating a Terry Gilliam film were behind me. Then came the announcement that the long-delayed, oft-thwarted production of The Man Who Killed Don Quixote would be shown as the closing night film at Cannes in 2018. The screening came and went, but the movie never arrived in the U.S. due to legal matters. The film has finally surfaced on iTunes, and we've now both caught up with it. After having it feature in our news segment several times, Alan, what was your take on this film, and did it manage to capture a glimmer of the skill that some of Gilliam's well-received works like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Brazil, The Fisher King, 12 Monkeys are lauded for?
Yeah. So, So this was a movie, right? I mean, it was a full. Okay, all right.
It was a movie. It wasn't a dream that you may have had.
Well,
a fever dream.
It could be considered a little bit of a dream. I will say this. I had a fun time with this movie.
Okay.
It's definitely has some issues, and it does cripple under the fact that I think you see the restraints of a budget. You see the restraints of a production that have gone way too long, and just you kind of got the sense that this film, they're almost like saying, look, we had this one chance to just go ahead and get this thing made. Adam Driver is a willing participant. Let's use him. Let's go. Let's just get it out and get it done. And while I thought the end result was fun, I definitely felt like it was probably the least... it's weird saying this. Visually, I thought it was one of the least Terry Gilliam-like films, but I also think part of that had to do with budget and production timeframes and other things that were maybe forced on him to get this thing going and get it done and finally take the advantage to do it. It is not the disaster I thought it might be when I went into it. I actually had a lot more fun with it than I expected to.
Okay.
It does help that you have two very willing participants in, like I said, Adam Driver and Jonathan Pryce playing, quote, Don Quixote, unquote.
Sure.
I think those two made the film enjoyable and watchable. I don't know how it would have worked if we didn't have those two so eager and game to go along with it and have fun with these roles, because they really, really were having, I think, a fun time playing these parts.
Sure.
Even if the rest of the movie around it didn't quite hold up to it. So I will say I give it a pass. I liked it. I had a fun time watching it. I wish it could have been more. I wish it could have been the bigger vision, I think, that probably Terry Gilliam had when he first envisioned this film, with a bigger budget and maybe more time for production. Who knows? But as it was, I think it was a fine, entertaining movie. Definitely not one of Terry Gilliam's better films, but I think it's an okay addition to his filmography at this point. At least he can say, check the box, did it, finally got it done. Let's move on. What about you, Chris? I'm curious.
On that note, just kind of round out, what was the last Terry Gilliam film that you saw?
Oh, gosh.
Any of those that I mentioned in my intro, have you seen?
Nope.
Okay, that's kind of why I threw him in there.
Yeah.
Well, what were my thoughts? So overall, I think I am positive on the film. I think I may be a little more positive than you. And I think that comes from the fact that I mentioned some of the ones that he's well known for, some of the ones that you have seen: Fisher King, 12 Monkeys, Brazil, My Python and the Holy Grail. And that was kind of him at the height of his powers.
Sure.
He still has a really good imagination, I feel like, and has interesting ideas, but I think whether it's because he's hard to work with and maybe he can't get funding, I'm not sure what all the, the things that have plagued this thing for so long. You hear financial troubles. He's had stars come and go. Johnny Depp was at one point going to be the person that Adam Driver ended up being. The documentary that you and I have talked about, they showed Johnny Depp kind of taking on that role.
And I could have seen that too. I mean,
I can't.
I can. I'm not saying it would have been better. No, hear me out. I mean, I'm saying I could see him playing the role. I think I could see him in that type of style role, but I don't think he could have done it better than Adam Driver. Adam Driver was really good in that role.
Maybe Johnny Depp of like in the 2000s or 19
and that's
years
when
ago.
They were talking about making it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Maybe, but still I was so won over by Adam Driver and Jonathan Pryce. I can't imagine anybody else doing it.
I agree.
And I think, something about the nuance that Adam Driver was able to bring to the role, I don't think, Johnny Depp could have done. But I'll get to that in a second, because that kind of plays into what I took away from the film that I don't think his most recent works. I mentioned Zero Theorem, Tideland, Dr. Parnassus, which that was another problematic one quickly because Heath Ledger died. Because Heath Ledger was supposed to be like kind of the lead character in that. He died, so he had to kind of work around it and didn't really end up working. So for me, even though it doesn't go to the grandeur of his, heyday films, it was kind of a return to, no, this is a complete work, even though it took a long time to do. And I feel like Gilliam's ideas are still there. And the most effective thing that I thought, and I think it worked, regardless of, actually in a way, it kind of worked because of the budget. And that is the whole conceit of this is that Adam Driver at one point made a student film. And he basically does like this take on the Man of La Mancha, Don Quixote. Okay, years later, he's come back. He's in the area. He's like a director who has had a lot of fame. But right now, he happens to be shooting a commercial, and he's not really invested in it. He's basically just, phoning it in, essentially.
But it's a commercial all around the whole Don Quixote concept. So
correct.
Yeah.
And while he's there shooting it, he comes in contact with various people who were in this student film that he shot, years ago, at the beginning of his career, basically. And what was interesting for me is at first he's kind of a little bit dismissive, but then the further down the rabbit hole he goes, he sees how these people's lives were affected by what he had done, and it got him fame, but where did it leave them?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the Don Quixote character played by Jonathan Pryce, originally, back when he did his student film, this guy was just a random dude who was like a shoemaker. And, he was really good at what he did, but he wasn't an actor. But, Adam Driver's character was kind of like, oh, I'm going to use found people and everything. And, the guy couldn't remember his lines and everything, but somehow through the magic of cinema or whatever, he just kind of became, air quotes, Don Quixote.
Yeah.
And then the tragedy that you see is that he never divorced himself from this character.
Right.
And so he spends the rest of his life thinking in his head. So, it kind of follows along with the original Don Quixote story. And it is not a perfect film. Mm-hmm. Yes, some of the things do not work, but I like how they wove in things that characters were imagining, both Adam Driver's character, which I forget his actual...
Toby,
there we go. So I can quit calling him Adam Driver, but Toby as the director, and then the Don Quixote character, you see different things at different times that are imagined in their heads, and it's kind of, sometimes you can't tell reality from what's not reality, which plays into the whole, are they making a movie? Is this part of a movie? Is this part of the commercial? What exactly is going on? And without spoiling anything, where the film ends and the way two characters are at the end of the film and their relationship to each other is very interesting and is actually really kind of cool. Now, because I don't want to spoil kind of how that ends, because that is the very end of the movie. So for me, all that was really interesting. It's very different from anything you see. Now, I guess in a way you can look at it and be like, oh man, it's a shame that he couldn't have made it with all the funding and everything. And it is, but in a way, somehow that's kind of a commentary on the director. He ends up kind of selling himself. He's doing a commercial. He's not really commercial vested in it. Whereas, like, I don't know, it's kind of a commentary on art. Honestly, I got a lot out of it.
Well, I'll tell you, story-wise, I loved it. I mean, the story itself, the description you gave, the synopsis of it, all the beats of it were great. Where I think this film just lost a little bit is it became really shaggy through most of the middle section of the film, where it had a lot of little subplots going on and kind of trying to tie them all together. There's a lot of commotion. There's a lot of, scenes. There's some, I don't want to call them chase, but, there's some scenes that are meant to kind of play with this idea of, trying to chase down one another, and it just got a little shaggy, where it's just, I think...
Well, it's a little bit of the quest of Don Quixote, because he is on a quest. And so
but the quest got just a little muddied, and it got a little kind of... I don't know. I think, honestly, once the time we get into, I'll just say, like, the palace, kind of a more of a physical structure out of the desert, out of the wilderness, and we get there, I really lost a lot of interest. I don't feel like we had that dynamic between Toby and Don Quixote. They were separated for a good part of the film, and I think the real best part of the film was them interacting with one another and kind of playing off each other. So that's where I say it kind of got shaggy. It just lost a little bit of a focus. I think it lost a little bit of the charm it had built up in the first half. I did love the way it ended. I agree with you on that.
It was a good ending.
And in my comments about the budget, I mean, again, I don't need this to be a huge high-dollar budget production film, but I think Terry Gilliam's imagination, I felt like, got a little limited at times because of the budget restraints.
Oh, absolutely.
There was one scene where Don Quixote is envisioning something and they use some form of computer animation on some objects. And it was kind of cool, but it was like the only moment in the film where you felt like they actually could do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying I needed CGI at all throughout it, but it's like, if you're really going to play with the imagination and play with what these characters are seeing and what they're seeing to be real or not, some scenes just seemed a little low budget, and it didn't match that idea of the imagination and the quest that they were doing. Again, I think the story at play was awesome. I think Adam Driver was great, and I think really funny too. I think he had some reaction shots and throwaway lines that were just so good. And then, Jonathan Pryce, thinking about how we saw him in The Wife just a few months ago, and now seeing him play the most absurd, bonkers character he could possibly play, and he was really good. He seemed to be having a great time doing it.
Goofing on himself.
Oh, absolutely.
And, they both seemed really at home in their Terry Gilliam characters. I think Adam Driver...
I think everybody else outside of those two were good, but I don't know if they were quite relishing the story as much as those two were.
I would agree. I don't think maybe they really knew what was going on as much as the two central people, and maybe that was by design, but you kind of think that was a little bit of kind of a haphazard nature of it. I think Adam Driver, what was about his performance here, he was great, but I don't think I've ever seen him really be able to do comedy. I've seen him be serious. I've seen him be aloof and stuff like that, and other roles that he's had. But kind of the mixture of both. He's this pompous film director, but he's like kind of goofing on himself. He's kind of clueless as to what's going on. It was a really nice range. So
I actually found a lot of similarities to The Fisher King, which is my favorite film of Terry Gilliam.
Because it deals with delusions.
It does.
Somebody who doesn't,
delusions, and I think even the Toby, the Adam Driver character, had a lot of Jack, the Jeff Bridges character, the DJ character, a little bit in him too.
Okay,
someone who's maybe had a peak of popularity, maybe has slipped from that a little bit or lost focus on who he is or who he's supposed to be, falling in with someone that has these kind of delusions of grandeur and kind of a bigger picture of themselves, like the Robin Williams character. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities there. So maybe why I did like this film ultimately, and I think the story really worked for me. But it was enjoyable. Again, I wish Gilliam could have made this at his peak. Sure. When he had the resources and the time and everything around him, but keep the same cast. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, the cast is great.
Just add the production value, tidy up the story more. I almost felt like we spent so much time in the castle or palace because it was a set that they could use, and it was cheaper to do that. That's honestly the impression I got.
And are you talking about specifically kind of the last third where they're having okay.
Yeah. Okay. By the time they got to this palace, this castle, however you want to phrase it.
Sure.
Again, I don't want to give too much away what was really going on with it, but when it got to that point, I just kind of felt like it's like, okay, yeah, we had to bring him into this set and use this set as much as possible. And again, I hate judging a film by that, but I do feel like that they were a little more limited with it. We've seen Terry Gilliam films where the imagination is just bonkers through the roof.
Right.
And I felt like this could have used a little bit more of that at times to really bring us into that world. As it was now, the imaginative parts of it, the more fantastical parts were, I think, very small and fewer and far between. And it just didn't help lend to the story as much as it could have. So,
I think the shame of it for me is that the films that I mentioned in the intro, they had, I think, more money, but because they didn't get any kind of returns, it was like, diminishing returns with every single one of those films. Yeah. And so finally he's like, well, I've already got this film 85% made, or maybe it was only 30% made, but he somehow managed to get the rest of it done, but it was on such a low budget. And the shame of it is, it would have been I think it would have been up there with some of those we've mentioned, Fisher King and stuff, if he had only not squandered the ill will, or he hadn't had those 3 in a row. Basically, he had 3 strikes in a row.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like, and so it's a shame because I think the potential was there, the acting was there, the story was there, everything was clicking. But something holds it back. But even the movie acknowledges it. The opening titles kind of says 10 years in the making or 15 years in the making. It acknowledges that and says, and then goes to the title. So I'm glad we finally got to see it. I actually thought it was less shaggy than what I thought it would be.
Well, yeah. I mean, really, if I compare it to what my probably initial suspicions were, it was a much better movie than I expected.
I thought it was going to be an absolute disaster, like a mess disaster.
I mean, it certainly had the capability of being so. Sure. You hear all the backstory of the film, but...
and then when it took so long after they premiered it in Cannes, you actually heard, mixed stuff, but overall, generally kind of positive. Mm-hmm. And then it didn't show up at all. And you're like, okay, is it really legal trouble or is it just terrible?
That was concerning. I will say just a couple of things I'll call out that I really liked in the film. The reintroduction of Jonathan Pryce as Don Quixote at his little tourist attraction sideshow, I thought was really well done.
It was.
And fun.
And that was a glimpse of something that you think, it was like a moment that they were able to kind of do effectively.
Yeah. It worked perfectly. And and I'll say the music. I thought the music was really good. Actually, the music, I hate going back to the production value, but the music actually elevated the film. I felt it gave it a very epic feel to it, even when sometimes the visuals and what we were seeing didn't always match it. But
probably because maybe originally when we started out in 2000 or whenever he originally started, maybe that was one of the first things they were able to get in the bag.
But I distinctly recall listening to the music and saying, man, that music really, really elevates the film from where it is. So, I did enjoy the film. It's one of the, better Gilliams, I guess, in recent history.
Oh, without a doubt.
So that's nice to see. And Adam Driver still just, to me, cements himself as an actor that I'm always intrigued to see what he does next, because he has made some really fascinating choices in film projects between the Jarmusch films he's done. He's got the new one coming out with the zombie film, the Jarmusch film that he's in. Between this, of course, you got the Star Wars saga. I mean, just some really interesting characters he likes to play.
And it looks like the Jarmusch film is going to be able to exercise his comedic talents a little more.
I hope so, because they were really good here.
Yeah,
So they were great.
I will say, kind of a minus that I'll mention, Stellan Skarsgård, who I like. He's been in tons of stuff. He was in it, and I feel like if his character could have been a little bit more fleshed out or given more to do, could have been a lot more interesting. And somebody that I think we originally saw her in that Tom Cruise science fiction movie, and she's been in a couple other things, but Olga Kurylenko, she's good and not really given a whole lot to do either.
Well, that's the thing, is that those are characters that, I understand what their purpose was in the film.
Sure.
But I felt like a little wasted. You even had some of the supporting characters on the film set that I thought were interesting, but yet, we see them for a few minutes at the beginning, and then we don't see them again for like an hour and a half.
Sure.
Jason Watkins played Rupert. You got Paloma Bloyd as Melissa. Some really interesting characters, like they're in the production, and they're really just there very early on, and then you don't see him again for a good bit. I will say one actress that I was not familiar with at all, but I thought was really pretty impressive.
You're talking about the love interest.
Yeah,
Toby.
Angelica, so Joanna Ribeiro, I thought was really good. She was. She held her own there with Adam Driver. So I would say of the performances, hers did rise above some of the other ones.
And I think I'm on the same page with that. And I think originally when you see her, you're like, okay, here's the pretty face, and she's there to be a pretty face and kind of be the love interest, but she's not really going to be able, probably to limitations of the script, she's not really going to be able to add anything. But no, she does. She's great. And, I think it was nice to see that she was able to kind of, have a character that was fleshed out.
Well, she had to play two different ages, playing
true.
like a 15-ish year old early in the film, and she was really good at playing that. And then when you see her 10 years later and, and who she's become, and
right.
I don't know, it was a good performance.
And that's something interesting you mentioned, and maybe it's because we're familiar with various degrees of success, kind of the Gilliam nature and how he does things. So her playing this little teenager with braces, and then suddenly you see her older, and it's like you kind of get it, and maybe we're already going to forgive Gilliam because we kind of know what he's doing. But it just works, and she definitely did a good job playing it.
I thought so too.
It worked, I guess. Yeah, I guess to sum up my feelings of it, I really appreciated the themes, and I think in a way, it's like the perfect thing where this movie worked better in a way. If it could have been done originally, like you're saying, a long time ago, it probably would have been awesome.
And I think it would have actually been kind of a hit. I think it would have caught with some audiences too.
But something about this film, because of its storied history and the all the problems it had getting made, somehow it's just really cool how it parallels what's going on with Toby, the creativity of his youth, the pureness of it, and then the disappointment with himself once he has to sell his work for hire. He loses creativity or creative control, the realization that sometimes the outcomes of his success can come at the price of others. Like, you wonder. So it kind of ends up working as a parallel for Terry Gilliam, which I don't think is what he intended originally, but who knows? So I don't know.
I think the background of the production of the film actually does add some lore to the film that gives it a nice personality to it.
And I think that's what helps despite the production budget. Like if it didn't have that lore to help it at this point, it probably wouldn't be that good.
What would have been a perfect scenario is you have all that production drama and lore, but you've still got Terry Gilliam putting out some really good films.
In the meantime.
So then it's like when he finally gets to do this, he's still got the ability and the budget and all that to really make this the vision he wanted. I felt like he was just having to limit his own vision to get this thing made. And that's where I was a little disappointed that it didn't do more. Like, for example, Chris, there's a quick throwaway scene early in the film.
Okay.
Where Toby is kind of exploring the village.
On a motorcycle.
Yeah, on the motorcycle.
Gotcha.
He's exploring the village. Hey, I remember this. This is the village where I shot my student film. And he wants to go kind of check in on a couple of the people he remembered.
Right.
And he goes into a bar and he starts talking to the owner of the bar, who I guess is Angelica's father, maybe.
Yes.
And they're talking, and there's subtitles running along the bottom. But then at one point, Toby just says, "What? We don't need these," and like takes his hand and pushes the subtitles away. that was a great moment. That was a very Gilliam moment.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, I wanted more of that. It's like, if you're going to tease me with that kind of breaking the fourth wall and doing something really kind of creative, inventive, don't hobble me the rest of the film now, where I don't feel like we ever really get to explore that same level again. So little moments like that made me wish there was more of that. But the moments we did have were fun.
I think, the playfulness, unfortunately, that I think Gilliam's known for, that I think, unfortunately, budget constraints, and the time that it took to make this, like, the love is gone, and a lot of the playfulness has been drained out. There was still some,
just not enough.
Just have been drained out.
Yeah,
I think for me too. Now he's made this film. It is the best of his three previous films weren't that great. This is like not a return to form, but it shows I've still got some magic left. Mm-hmm. Now that this albatross has left his shoulders, he's finally put it out there in the world. I hope he does another film and it's as good, if not better than this. I think he's capable of it. I just don't know if he's so burned out. He's like, look, I'm done.
I think he needs to work with Adam Driver again.
Oh, that would be great.
I mean, really, I think you kind of find somebody that gets your style of humor and your style of storytelling and your characters, and you grab a hold of them and you don't let go.
Because I will say, even though his previous films didn't really work, they were original ideas, and they were, so that's the thing is he's not going to do James Bond 26, although that would be interesting.
It would be very interesting.
But so I hope he puts out another film, and I'd be very interested. My interest in his work is now peaked again, because I think, okay, he's shown he can still pull something together despite the trouble of production. I'm curious to see what he does next.
Yeah, great. Well, that's The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. It is available online on iTunes and Amazon and other places you can buy it. Probably not going to see it in a theater anywhere anytime soon.
Probably not.
If you did not catch it already in a quick theater run, then you're definitely going to have to watch it online. But it is available online now for everybody to see. And I think Chris and I are both saying, yes, it is worth a watch, especially if you are a Terry Gilliam fan. It is a good addition to the filmography. Chris, a little higher on than I am. I have some misgivings that I wish they could have had more time and resources to make this film what I feel like it was envisioned to be. But as it is, it's definitely been an improvement in what we've seen from Gilliam in recent years. So that's The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. And when we come back, we will be returning with some movie news. And then we will also wrap up the show with our recommendations of the episode. So stay tuned. You're listening to Footcandle Films here on themesh.tv.
Hey guys, this is Mary Margaret from the Chick Chat podcast. Are you interested in promoting your business to an online audience? Your advertisement could be right here on The Mesh Podcast Network. Head over to themesh.tv for more details.
Welcome back to Footcandle Films here on themesh.tv. You've heard our review of Avengers Endgame and of The Man That Killed Don Quixote. Now we're going to move into some movie news. This is the part of the show where Chris and I comb the internet and find a few movie news items that we want to share and discuss, and film projects that may be coming down the line, franchises that we're interested in, actors, actresses, directors, whatever it may be. And Chris, I will admit, the two things I definitely want to talk about a little bit are both franchise films situation. So we're going kind of heavy on the franchise this episode with Avengers, and now we're doing these, but they are newsworthy, and I think it's worthy to talk about.
So we're not gonna talk about Ugly Dolls this time.
What? I don't even know what that is. That's an animated movie, right?
Yeah, it is.
Boy. Yeah, I unfortunately don't know anything about it. So
that's probably best.
I will talk about, though, a film franchise that I mentioned earlier, which is the James Bond franchise. So we have talked about some of the dynamics going on behind the scenes of this film. This is the situation where they have the 25th Bond film that is going to be worked on.
And they have or have not released the title?
They still have not.
Okay.
Even after all these other announcements, still no name. Daniel Craig still signed on to do it. He was the one that said for a while that he would never do another James Bond, but I guess they waived enough money, and he's like, well, I'll do one more.
Okay.
So he's going to do it. This is one that was supposed to be Danny Boyle was going to be directing for a while. He was attached to it, but now it's going to be directed by Cary Fukunaga. He's a filmmaker who made the first season of True Detective. I don't know if you ever saw that show or not.
I didn't, but I know the filmmaker for sure.
Yep. He's taken the reins after Danny Boyle's parted ways over creative differences. There's been a lot more drama with this film. And I think the last Bond film was what, Spectre?
Spectre.
It's been a little while. I mean, and the fact that this film hasn't even started filming yet.
And the same guy who did Spectre did Skyfall, right?
Correct. Yeah, it is. So it's just been a little long here. Well, they did make a few announcements about where they're going with this installment. Still no name, but they did confirm that Oscar winner Rami Malek will be the villain. I'm okay with that. That's interesting.
Is he going to be the villain because he's still going to be doing a Freddie Mercury impression? Everybody's like tired of seeing that, so they're going to like hunt him down.
I think it's going to be kind of. I mean, I'm all for it because you see you have a typical Bond villain and he fits a certain stereotype. I like the fact this one's younger. We don't really have young villains normally in the Bond movies. He's a different ethnicity. I don't know. It could be interesting. And I think Rami Malek's a pretty good actor. So. Although I have caught back up with Bohemian Rhapsody again since seeing it in the movie theater, and it doesn't hold up as well.
Okay.
Got a lot more issues with it the next time I saw it.
Which do you have more issues with, just to totally grind everything to a halt? Green Book or Bohemian Rhapsody?
Oh, definitely more issues with Green Book.
Okay.
I can watch Bohemian Rhapsody and be entertained. But if I want to watch it from an acting or how directing standpoint or storytelling, it's not really that good. It's great. Bohemian Rhapsody is good for performances. Mm-hmm. It's good for watching Rami Malek be Freddie Mercury. It's good for watching the band up on stage play.
Right.
Everything off the stage starts to kind of fall apart a little bit. Anyway,
fair enough.
Sorry, this isn't about Bohemian Rhapsody.
No,
just Rami Malek. Unfortunately, any discussion of Rami Malek for like the next year
is going
to 2
to
years
always
is always going to reference Bohemian Rhapsody. That's kind of his curse now. So, so we have Rami Malek as the villain.
Okay.
We have some familiar faces showing back up in the film. So we have Ben Whishaw, who was Q in the last few films, will be back. Jeffrey Wright, who played American agent Felix Leiter, will be back. Ray Fiennes will be back as the new M. So you're getting a lot of the same people back. That's good.
And you're getting some new random fresh face as the new Bond girl.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I don't know if it's necessarily the Bond girl because I kind of feel like maybe the Bond girl trope has been faded out in the last few films. I think they've kind of done away with this iconic.
Wisely so.
I agree. But someone who got added to the cast, and I don't know if it's going to be in that situation or not, is the woman who plays Carol Danvers' friend in Captain Marvel, and I'm having a hard time drawing the name.
Okay.
She played Monica Rambeau in Captain Marvel, but I don't know her actress's name. But she was added to the film, which could be good as well. So we've got some names being Lashana Lynch. That's it.
Okay.
Lashana Lynch is being added to the cast. So I think curious to see where this goes. The fact that there's just been so much drama behind the scenes makes me a little worried about it. So we'll see what happens with it, though.
Yeah, I couldn't be less excited about another Bond movie. Skyfall did kind of wake me up and think like, whoa, Bond movies can be interesting again. But yeah, I just haven't really I've never really been a Bond fanatic. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see once they come out. Can I care? Will I think it's good? Because I'm sure we'll probably see it.
I am more of a Bond fan, but I'll admit, Spectre was a big letdown. It didn't work for me as a film. I did like Casino Royale, which was like 3 films ago, and I did like Skyfall. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, other films before that, the Pierce Brosnan films, none of those really did a lot for me. So
sure.
It's been hit or miss, and that's where I say it's, when you look at a film franchise like the Marvel franchise, did you realize that all but 2 of the 22 films have had a positive Rotten Tomatoes, like fresh rating? 20 out of 22. That's pretty amazing, I think, from a critical standpoint.
Did you realize that all the Avengers films, with the exception of Endgame, meaning if they had Avengers in the title, were all released at the same time as a Hotel Transylvania film?
No, I did not know that.
Yes.
Except for this one.
Okay, I was going to say, because I don't think there was Avengers Age of Ultron and Avengers Infinity War all came out at the same time as a Hotel Transylvania film.
That's very interesting. Okay.
It's not worth anything, but it's an interesting bit of trivia.
Good to know.
So there's that.
Let's move on to my other news item, which, again, we're deep in franchise territory here. But Chris, I know your aversion to watch to watching certain trailers.
Yes.
Unless you are absolutely presented with that trailer in a movie theater environment to watch. You are a big Star Wars fan.
I am.
So the Star Wars trailer for Episode 9 was released about 2 weeks ago, I believe.
I think that's
And you just saw it for the first time last night because
Correct.
it was attached to Avengers.
which I assumed I will see it in the theater, which is how I like to see trailers. And I was like, Disney owns Marvel, so I'm going to guess that they're going to place the Star Wars trailer. And they did. So
They did. So I have to ask, since we have not talked about it, what did you think? Great. It's a teaser trailer.
It is.
It's very light on details at this point.
It is, which I like light on details. Because it just gets you excited. I would be happy if, after seeing the trailer, if I don't see anything else.
Yeah. Good luck with
Like,
that.
I don't really want any more trailers because this one, I thought it was good, but you didn't really learn a lot, which is good for me. The mere title actually has me kind of worried. Rise of Skywalker, just because I thought with the previous film, a lot of the Skywalker mythology was kind of being put to bed, but they're kind of bringing that back up again. So I was thinking it was kind of phasing out with Luke, and even though he may be there in Jedi spirit to kind of guide goings-ons, I was kind of hoping that it would kind of fade. So the title actually worries me a little bit, but the cameo that they show, or the person they show that hasn't been in any of the newer films, The Force Awakens or Last Jedi, they show him, and I think I'd heard this person was coming back. Lando, they show Lando, and I'm like, yep, okay, sure enough, here he is. Didn't bother me. I am excited about the film. I thought it was a good trailer. The imagery they showed, a lot of the shots and everything were very epic in scope, and of course they've got the music there. Not sure how I feel about the laugh at the end. But the one thing that stands out to me as like the coolest shot, and I kind of wish in a way that they hadn't shown it because I thought it was so awesome, was the very first thing they show where Rey's out in the desert and you see a craft approaching and you hear it, and then the maneuver that she does over, and then they cut from that. So you don't see any of the rest of that scene, but just that whole first scene, was just amazing.
No, it was well done.
I really liked it.
I understand they've got to show us whatever little glimpses of footage they can after that point. It really is just a montage after that of like more imagery, not anything plot.
They were showing kind of a scene, and then they cut from that scene and just show you a bunch of like random footage.
So it did its job in teasing. It got me excited for the film. There is the Palpatine laugh at the end. Which,
there you go.
Well, I mean, again, I don't think
it could mean
spoil
absolutely
on a trailer.
nothing. Yeah.
It could be nothing, and it could be that he's a Force ghost, just like Jedi have Force ghosts. We don't know. I mean, he could just be visiting Kylo Ren to like give him some motivation or something.
Some tips.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, here's something I would recommend you do to stop these guys.
Something that kind of confused me, which there again, I guess we'll learn. But, considering the path that Kylo Ren may take, they showed him seemingly like fusing his mask back together. Kind of surprised by that. But I guess depending on the path that this person is taking, maybe not surprising.
Well, I'm with you that I don't need to see another trailer.
Yeah.
I don't need to see any more detail. I'm fine. I realize we're still, we're not that far off. It's only
it's December
7 months off.
when it's going to come off.
Where normally they're showing this stuff like a year in advance. So I'm
Sure.
kind of glad they held off a little bit longer to show us this. But I think Lucasfilms, well, I guess, Disney now is still trying to make sure they've got a good pathway on this whole Star Wars franchise, because they kind of took some missteps. Solo was a big misfire for them. I think they're still trying to figure out just what to do, and maybe they're not wanting to overexpose it any more than they have in the past. So I think holding off a little bit more, waiting a little bit closer to release date to show stuff might be kind of the strategy. It's like, let's not just overdo it. Let's not water down this experience for everybody yet. So anyway, I'm just excited for this as I was when I saw the trailer for Last Jedi, or when I saw it for Force Awakens. Same level of excitement.
Well, I will say I'm not quite as excited for this as I was for Last Jedi, just because, it's JJ, and JJ Abrams is good, and I really like Lost that he did. He's got clever ideas and stuff, but the thing was with Rian Johnson's installment of Last Jedi, I was so excited because I wanted to see what somebody like that was going to do with that amount of money. And I am, I liked it. I know a lot of people didn't.
Oh, I loved it. I still think it's great. And
I'm just worried that this film, Rise of Skywalker, is going to fall back into a lot of what I wasn't as high on about The Force Awakens. Force Awakens is still a good film, but it just felt so familiar. And I'm worried that this last film is going to be a very Return of the Jedi.
Well, and I'm also concerned they're gonna negate some of the things that Rian Johnson did in Last Jedi too.
I'm also concerned about that, which is why the whole me mentioning Skywalker and Luke's voice, I'm like, because so many people were mad that he died at the end of Last Jedi. I don't know. Concerned.
Yes. I'm anxious to see it, but I can see there being maybe some frustrations with it.
Too much fan service done by J.J. Abrams to try to make some of the fanboys happy that got upset.
Which that's one thing I don't think Rian Johnson really did. I don't think he gave us a lot of fan service. He really just wanted to give us really what he thought were going to be great moments with these characters, and I agreed with them. Yeah. I thought they were good. The fact that we never saw... in Last Jedi, we didn't see Luke and Leia together until one scene. We never saw them in person together.
True,
if you think about it. Yeah. And even then, it was late in the movie. One scene, that was it. He just didn't seem interested in saying, "I just want to do fan service." He's like, "I want to tell an interesting story with these characters," and I'm just afraid that Carrie Fisher is in the trailer
which
for
scared
Rise of
me
Skywalker.
Because they talk about fan service, which I don't know timeline wise. That has to be.
She had already died.
Okay,
Carrie Fisher's already passed away.
Done any shooting because she died before. Actually,
they're doing it somehow. Either footage they shot before that they're going to reuse.
They used for Rian Johnson because they did have a hug in Rian Johnson's version, or maybe it was Force Awakens. They hugged at some point. Yeah.
I think they're reusing some takes and footage and giving her some moments. I don't know how they're going to pull that off. I really don't.
Yeah,
because I was actually surprised at how they pulled it off in Last Jedi to begin with. Her use, but then to still use her fully in this film is interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's my news items. Again, 2 franchise updates for us, and hopefully, maybe next time we get together, there might be some movie news about some little more unique, interesting film projects we can talk about instead of just the big ones that we know are coming down the pipe.
Sure.
All right, and let's go ahead and move right into our recommendations for the episode.
I'm going to recommend a film that popped up on Netflix. It apparently came out in 2017, but it's just now been released in 2019. For those who didn't feel like they got enough of Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame, I'm going to recommend, granted, she's not playing Captain Marvel, but she is with, Samuel Jackson. So you could say that she's with Nick Fury. Oh. Brie Larson, Samuel Jackson, in Brie Larson's directorial debut, Unicorn Store.
Okay.
Kind of an odd film. I can see why it didn't come out to audiences just in general theaters. It played at a couple of festivals. Netflix apparently picked it up, but then didn't release it. But I think with the huge success of Captain Marvel, they're like, hey, let's put this out there. Helped. It's quirky comedy, and I think the other thing that hinders it is because it's almost kind of a childlike idea. So you would think it would almost be a, G-rated movie. It's PG, but it kind of borders on being PG-13 because there's some harassment stuff going on in the workplace that you're kind of like, whoa. But it is, I think it did end up being rated PG. But the idea behind it is a woman named Kit receives a mysterious invitation that would fulfill her childhood dreams, and it is an invitation to go to the Unicorn Store. So, and Samuel Jackson is the proprietor of said Unicorn Store, wearing a pink suit and has confetti in his hair. Actually, in a weird way, it kind of seems like something Terry Gilliam would do. It's kind of bonkers, Tim Burton-esque kind of bonkers. But it's her first, she didn't write the screenplay, but she did direct it. And I thought it was kind of cool. It's not perfect, but what it's kind of going for about, and it kind of goes behind some of the Toby ideas from Don Quixote about not selling out and keeping your childhood, fancy or, creativity alive. So I'd check it out. It's on Netflix.
Unicorn Store.
It's called Unicorn Store.
On Netflix.
Yes.
All right. Brie Larson directing and starring in.
And directing and starring, yes.
Okay, cool. So, Chris, you asked me, I don't remember if it was on the show or if in the hallway at one point, you said, Alan, for your recommendation, are you going to recommend the new Pet Sematary?
Yes.
And the answer is, yes, I am. I'm
okay.
actually going to give it a recommendation. So, a little background here. Pet Sematary, the Stephen King novel from, I believe, the mid to late 80s.
I think so.
The first movie came out, Mary Lambert, I believe, was the director, came out in right around early 90s, I think.
Okay.
I don't have the dates in front of me, but I was never a big fan of that 90s version of the movie. I loved the concept of the story. Mm-hmm. So I was excited when the film came out in the 90s to see it. I was not a big horror fan, but I was still very intrigued by going to see this movie. And I went.
Gotcha.
I think I was maybe 15, 16 years old when it came out,
So
and it was.
You shouldn't have actually been seeing this in the theater.
No, I
then.
shouldn't have. I remember actually I think sneaking in with my friends to see
I
it.
see.
And thinking, you know what, it could have been a lot scarier. It could have been more. It just felt a little hokey, a little cliche. It just didn't work for me as well.
Okay.
There were some moments that worked great, but as a whole, the story itself just didn't have the same gravitas that I think that the King novel did, and it didn't go deep enough with kind of what was happening and why and all this.
Gotcha.
So for those not familiar with it, Pet Sematary is a story of a family that moves out to the countryside, and the father is a doctor. They have 2 children. A tragic accident befalls one of the children, but yet there is a mysterious pet cemetery near their property that they come to find out that has some sort of abilities that if you go beyond the pet cemetery to a hidden ground that's obstructed beyond it and bury something there, it does come back, but not quite the same as you remember it. So in this version, it's not perfect. Where I say the 90s version got us about 50% there, this one maybe gets us 75% there.
Okay.
Still has some gaps, still some things that didn't work. But I will give this one credit for, I think, evoking a much stronger tone.
Okay.
I think it had a much more sense of dread. The book, I know, deals a little bit with the mental state of the father and the decisions he makes with regards to his family members. I think this movie does a much better job of showing us that mental state of the main character than the older film did.
Okay.
And also, I hate to say it, and it is a little tiny spoiler, but I think every trailer has given this away, so I don't think I'm breaking any rules here. But they do a switch with which child is the one that comes back. Now, it's in the trailer. If you watch the trailer, you see it's the daughter, not the son, is the one that comes back from the pet cemetery. And I think this is my main reason for recommending this film. Jete Lawrence plays the daughter.
Okay.
And she's really good. I mean, she's really good in this film. And they actually spend a little more time in this film where she has come back, but instead of like the little baby Gage in the 90s, where the baby just came back and was just for no reason that anybody could explain, just wanting to go around and kill everybody. There's actually some rationale for it in this film. Like, we have a little better understanding of kind of what's really going on,
okay,
why it is these things come back, and why it is they have a tendency towards violence.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's actually some interesting moments too upon a return. The father and the child having some moments together that are interesting before things go a little crazy. And again, just little moments that I think really help benefit the story. It's not perfect. They do some callbacks to the original movie, or where they try to tease the audience, say, oh, you think you're going to do this scene just like we did in the old film version, but oh, no, we're going to jerk it away from you at the last second. They do that too many times where it's kind of annoying, where if you watch the 90s version and you like that film, they're just jerking around with you in this version a little bit more. And I thought that was a little too...
Is that kind of where the John Lithgow character, is he a little bit too...
No, I thought he was good.
Oh,
he was
good.
fine.
Okay.
But now in the 90s version, he dies, and he dies in a particular gruesome way. And they kind of play with that in this film. Like, oh, you see him walking into a room and there's a bed right there, so you know what's going to happen. And they even give you a camera angle from under the bed, almost like say, oh, look out, it's coming.
Wow.
And then they jerk it away from you. It's like, nope, just kidding. That's not going to happen. And it's like, I
can see
get
how
it.
that
You're
would
kind of
go.
playing fun with it, but when you do it 3 or 4 times in the film with different situations, it's a little much. It's a little cloying, and I didn't care for that. And I will say Zelda, who, if you recall in the original film, was the sister of the mother character that she would have flashbacks to, that had a physical deformity and illness and was just a very scary character.
Sure.
They try to redo that here, and it's nowhere near as effective as the old one was. So a little hit or miss in some places, but I will say better tone, better story elements. I think it went a little deeper than the last film did, and was a little more interesting to watch. It raised a little more philosophical questions than I think the old version did. Try to play it a little more straight than the older one did too. So overall, I'm going to give this one a recommendation. Say, but I think it works better in a vacuum where you don't try to compare it to the 90s version. Go in looking at it as its own entity, and I think you have a better time with it.
2 comments. First, I'd be interested to see it because although I've read the book Pet Sematary, I don't think I've actually seen the movie, the original one.
Well, that's probably good.
I think I've maybe seen bits and pieces, but I've definitely never sat down.
I actually think that's a good thing then.
So yeah, I wonder if I would actually like this Pet Sematary. Second comment, you may be the one positive review I've heard of this film.
I know, yeah.
I think this is going to be this year's Mummy for you.
Maybe so. I will admit, I was kind of surprised when I saw the reviews have not been good for this. And every review I read, it almost just seems like they're saying, well, it doesn't do this as good as the last film did. Or by them changing the ending or changing this element of it, it's changing for no real reason. Again, if I'm comparing it to the 90s, I can do a back and forth all day long.
Sure.
Say, well, this part was better. This part wasn't better. That's not the way I want to look at the film. I want to watch it and say, all right, I want to watch it in its own merit. And I think on its own merit, I think it's a good movie. I think it's creepy.
Okay.
I think it generates a lot more discussion. I think, my wife and I watched it, and we actually saw it in a drive-in theater, and it was a perfect drive-in movie.
Yeah.
But even driving home, you're like, okay, so if this had happened, why did they do? Yeah, it makes sense why they did this. I understand this a little more. There was just a little more to it from a storytelling standpoint than I think we got before. Now, how does it compare to the original novel? I don't know, because I'm too much of a fraidy cat to actually read the novel, because I've heard it was pretty terrifying.
It's pretty messed up.
But I thought the movie was pretty good. So I'm giving it a fairly warm recommendation, not a hot recommendation. Just it's a good scary movie.
See, I never was convinced enough to see The Mummy. Still haven't seen it. However, you have convinced me I do want to see Pet Sematary now. I'm curious.
Well, listen, when it comes out online, for a couple dollars rental or whatever, yes, I think it's well worth it for sure. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'll be anxious to hear thoughts of anybody that is out there and agrees with me. If you're the one person out there that saw this and agreed that it was actually an improvement on the last one, I'd love to hear from you. So, all right. Well, that is our show for today. So we finished up with our recommendations. We did our reviews of Avengers Endgame and of The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. Both were positive reviews. I would say I was more high on Avengers Endgame than Chris was. And Chris was a little higher on Don Quixote than I was. But overall, we were giving them both favorable, positive reviews. And 2 films worth checking out. And then, of course, our recommendations here at the end as well. So, Chris, as anybody may have their opinions, their thoughts, their ideas they want to share with us, any questions or feedback, whereabouts should they go to provide us with that information?
Sure. The best way to provide feedback would probably send us an email to info@themesh.tv with Footcandle in the subject line. You can tell Alan that you saw Pet Sematary and you will stand with him against all the critics on the internet.
Stand with me on Pet Sematary 2019.
Absolutely. We also encourage you to subscribe to the show on iTunes, leave a star rating or a review because that helps us reach new listeners. So that's always nice. Alan and I are also on Letterboxd, and we also are on Twitter. Sometimes we post things on Twitter about movies, but we're at Chris Fry and at Alan Jackson. And last but not least, my duty to the film festival is to tell you that we will be holding one September 27th through the 29th here in Hickory. It's exciting. It'll be our 5th year. We're looking forward to it. So we will have more information about like the chosen films and the lineup come January. Or January. No, not that far out.
Yeah.
That wouldn't make sense.
Like in July.
July, the other J. Come July. So be on the lookout for that, but we're excited and looking forward to it. September 27th to the 29th, if you'll be able to make it.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. So it always is. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Remind you that you are listening to this show on themesh.tv. So we encourage you to check out our show along with other shows on the Mesh Network by visiting themesh.tv. That's THEMESH.TV. For Footcandle Films, I am Alan. That is Chris. And thank you so much for listening.
See you in the ticket line.
Watch news through the courtesy of Footcandle Film Society.
Special thanks to Carpal Tuller for the show theme music. For more about Carpal Tuller, visit www.carpaltuller.com. You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.